It says in Basi Lagani 57:11, Tafshin Yiraf, the Rebbe's first Maimer, that this world does not get oyer, that means light of Hashem, of godliness, through the path of Ishtalshalos, but rather it gets what's called Atzmus, which we translate into English as the essence, or I like to translate godliness in relationship with self, which so to speak means not a reflection of Hashem, not a radiation of Hashem, not a light of Hashem, but Hashem himself, which is present in the physical world for all kinds of mystical reasons. And the question therefore becomes is, why do you have to have the spiritual worlds? If this world is in any case relating to Atzmos directly, why do you have to have Giluyim? That's basically the question. And I can answer this in many ways, but I'm going to answer it in I guess the right word is a clinical way. In Tanya, chapter 38, the Alter Rebbe continues the discussion that he started in chapters 35, 36, and 37 about mitzvahs, actionable mitzvahs, behaviorable mitzvahs. And in those 3 chapters, he says essentially what's written in the Basi Lagani, that you're never closer to God than when you do a ritual commandment behaviorally. And as he explained in chapter 35, on a human level, because when you do what you're told, the overarching experience is submission, is bittul. You're not doing it because you understand it because you're feeling. You do it because you're a mitzvah v'eisa. You were instructed to do it. And on this basis, and for the basis, a variety of other bases in those 3 chapters plus means the first few lines of chapter 38, the Alter Rebbe argues the most important thing is the ritual performance of a mitzvah, because that, in quote, gets you to Atzmos, the Eibishter himself, not just his light, and it achieves the end that's called Dira B'Tachtenim, making this world home for Hashem. In chapter 38, the Alter Rebbe begins with the famous quote, Mitzvah b'loi kavana keguf b'loi neshama. A mitzvah, a ritual behavioral commandment fulfilled without any intent, without any feeling, without any investment of spirit, is like a body without a soul. And he proceeds to explain that this is why it's not enough to do the mitzvahs, it's also very, very important to have the kavanah. And over the next 3 chapters, 38, 39, and 40, he basically develops 4 levels of kavanah, 2 very directly and 2 less directly. In Asiya, the kavanah would be Haidah and Tmimus, and Yetzirah it would be Dechilu Rechimu Tivim, and Bria would be Dechilu Rechimu Sichlim, and Atzilus would be the Madrega of Merkava. I'm not explaining, I'm just framing. So chapter 38 begins the discussion that balances out the priority of the ritual behavior being the primary component of our service when we do mitzvahs with the need for spirituality and intent and so on. But he adds a very, very important little point, and that's the point that I want to focus on here. And that is that the need to do mitzvahs, but before I get to that point, okay, let's start over. But that phrase alone, mitzvah b'lei kavanah guf b'lei neshama, a mitzvah, a commandment done without intent is like a body without a soul, is very, very, very loaded. What it's saying is, if I do the mitzvah and I don't have the kavanah, I have the body, it's just not alive. If I do the kavanah, the intent, the spirituality, and I don't have the mitzvah, I have nothing, because I live in a physical world, and in a physical world things need physical embodiments. When I have the mitzvah, which is the behavioral performance, which is the most important thing, and I infuse it into that body, vibrancy, life, vitality, so then it's a living mitzvah, then it's an energized mitzvah, it's a meaningful mitzvah. But even in that phrase alone, mitzvah b'lei kavanah keguf b'lei neshama, a mitzvah done without intent is like a body without a soul, you already have represented that the most important thing is the maaseh, is the spiritual performance, and the intent is secondary. Having said that, I want to add one little point which the Alter Rebbe makes, which I think is very critical, and that is that the reason to have kavanah is because God said so. Having an intent in doing a mitzvah means that when I do a mitzvah, I don't just do the act, but I also try to experience what's called love and fear of God, and appreciate the meaning, the kavanah of that individual mitzvah on whatever level I am able. What this mitzvah means in this world or in another world, on this level or another level, whether it's midas tevis or it's deis nechonis, or it's yichudim, or it's berudim, or it's tshuva, or it's nisyanis, and so on. It's a commandment, it's a mitzvah. So the spiritual half of Yiddishkeit, which is not the etzem, it's the gilui. It's not what we call the essence of God, God himself, which is available to us through the ritual performance of a mitzvah. But the so-called light of Hashem, which we experience in a personalized and an enlightened kind of a way, is also an instruction. Hashem commands us to do mitzvahs with kavanah, and both become commandments. It is only the physical, behavioral aspect of the mitzvah has the strength of involving submission. I'm doing it just because he said, and I'm using my physical body in the physical world, and as such, because of the mystical relatedness between the lowest realm and the highest, in doing a physical mitzvah, I'm in touch with Haguf, Nenes min Haguf. Today happens to be Beis Tevis, the second day in the month of Tevis, that the Gemara says about Chodesh Tevis, that it's the month Yerach, Shaguf, Nenes min Haguf, that one body benefits from another, and Chassidus explains, the Rebbe explains, that this means that the physical body of a Jew is in touch with the so-called physical body of the Eibush himself, which means he has no body, of course. The so-called Atzmos, the Eibush as he is by himself. And this is available through the ritual performance of a mitzvah, but he also commanded us to have the kavanah. And because he commanded us to have the kavanah also has the property of being an inyan atzmi, of being absolute truth, because the meaning that we invest isn't defined by the specific meaning that we have. The meaning that we invest is defined by the fact that he told us to have this kavanah. And therefore, when you ask the question, if it is true, and it is true, that in the physical world, which is the darkest of the world, there's no world lower than this when it comes to the concealment of godliness, because here God is concealed absolutely, and there cannot be less than zero in terms of concealment of Hester Ede Yisbarach, Panav Yisbarach. So this is the lowest world, and in this lowest world we do mitzvahs, and in doing mitzvahs we have access to atzmas, but he also instructed that we should have an intent. And the intent that we have becomes a part of the mitzvah because he so instructed us. So it's not atzmos the way the mitzvah itself is atzmos, but it's atzmos in terms of the tziyus. The fact that I'm doing what he said also makes it atzmos. So you don't need, and of course, once you understand what I just said, you understand why you have to have ishtalshalos. Because any kavanah we're going to have that's going to be based on Torah. That means Chochmah Nestorah, Chochmah Se'emet, Chochmah Kabbalah requires Seder Ishtalshalos. You can't meditate about levels of godliness and bringing godliness down if those levels don't actually exist. So because the Kavanah mitzvah is a part of the mitzvah, because he wants not just the ritual behavior, but also the meaning behind it, so he needs to have the spiritual worlds that account for, that deliver the light and the enlightenment associated with the particular kavanah that a person is going to have. And that's an explanation of why you have to have the spiritual worlds. But what I'm doing in answering the question is making the spiritual worlds primary like the physical world is primary. Because the kavanah, the spiritual intent, although it is secondary to the ritual behavioral performance of the mitzvah, but in its own way, it is the ritual, it is the behavioral performance of a commandment by Hashem, and therefore has atzmas in it. Like it says in one place in Tafresh Mem Gimel, I saw it on top of page Lamed Ches. It's a very rare allusion. I think it's not page Lamed Ches. That since, in order to have the lowest world, which is atzmas, you have to have the higher worlds, because they deliver atzmos from the highest worlds through Seder Shachos to the lowest worlds. They in effect have atzmos in as much as they're delivering atzmos to Elam Hazeh. In other words, even though Giloim is less than atzmos, and Hishtashlos is Giloim and Elam Hazeh is atzmos, because the Hishtashlos of Elam Hazeh is the means through which atzmos is brought from a higher level to a lower level that comes into this world, and we're able to connect to atzmos through our bittul and through performance of mitzvahs, they have the mile of atzmos as well. So therefore, even though they're only Giluyim, they have the mile of Atzmos in the respect that they're bringing Atzmos to its own fruition. This is my official answer. I think it's a correct answer. But on a human level, I want to add that if you understand Chassidus, especially if you understand the history of Chassidus, especially if you understand the history of Chassidus Chabad, you know that Chabad has Chassidus Bechlal, and Chabad in particular has a built-in contradiction. On the one hand, they're all about the truth, and the truth, the whole truth, but nothing but the truth, to have a relationship with Hashem, which is absolutely emes. And in pursuing the truth, you make great sacrifice. But on the other hand, Chassidus is all about the personal relationship with God. It's about intimacy with Hashem, which is entirely individual. In other words, when you learn Chassidus, you learn on the one hand about the idea of putting yourself aside for the purpose, and on the other, how you cannot neglect your own spirituality and you need to spend whatever time you need to daven as long as you need to daven in order to engage with Hashem, to develop a personal relationship with the Eibishter. These two ideas within Chassidus are the atzmos and the gili of Chassidus itself. On the one hand, Chassidus talks to the point of Yiddishkeit, and the point of Yiddishkeit involves Mesidus Nefesh and Kabbalah Sel, submission, sacrifice. But on the other, Chassidus is also about Pnimius very much, and Pnimius is about the personal connection and the individual connection. And that personal, individual connection is very connected to what we call in our culture Giluyim, limited levels of divine light which we're able to touch and be touched by. And that's why you need Ishtalshalos.